Welcome everyone to the Ask an Architect show. Here with me today, Shannon Kraus. Shannon, thanks for joining. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Shannon has a long history and tenure leading many of the collaterals, also past officer of the AIS.
Proud.
A big resume behind him, but we actually want to talk to him today about what he's doing day to day, what his life is like in his current position, and hopefully shed some light on what it's like in the kind of the top tier in the leadership of a firm. So Shannon, for our audience at home, mostly college students, some emerging professionals, can you kind of give us the 3-minute synopsis of who you are and what you're doing right now?
Yeah, you bet. So I'm Executive Vice President, shareholder with HKS Architects. We're about a 1,400 person firm in 24 cities globally. My current role is leading the East Coast region of the firm, which is about 7 offices. And then I'm also the Global Operations Director for our healthcare, education, government, and structural group.
So that's a pretty heavy duty title, and I'm sure that, or titles I should say, I'm sure there isn't a typical day for you, but what are some of the more typical common things that you do on a weekly basis? Managing people, relating with clients, what kind of things are kind of usual typical things? Because I want to get into the opposite here in a second.
Yeah, sure. So my day is, my role is split kind of into 3 buckets, and about a third of my time is direct client work, so working with clients on projects. About a third of my time is business development, and then about a third of my time is on the operations business side of the practice. And then each of those things will vary throughout the year. So as we get to the end of the year, we start thinking about, on the operations side, we start thinking about budgeting for the coming year, strategic planning. So there's a lot more intensity on the operations side. The client stuff is episodic. I mean, it's throughout the year, it's ongoing.
Yeah.
And then business development can kind of ebb and flow. There's usually quiet spots during the year, but that's everything from setting strategy on pursuits, coming up with big ideas, that we want to inspire clients, and then serving the clients through the work.
So clients, operations, and then innovation in a lot of ways. Now those are very 3 different hats. And a lot of people aren't necessarily good at all of those 3 things at the same time. Give me a self-evaluation of how you thought your performance was when you first took this role versus how you manage it and handle it now. I'm sure you've gotten better at it, but were you better at one of those roles when you first started and then learned? Maybe it was operations or the client side. Which one was hardest for you when you first started, and which one did you feel most comfortable with?
Well, I've always gravitated towards the creative side. I mean, even in school, design courses, all that, just like most people do. But even at that time, I realized that business, if you subscribe the idea of a whole architect, well-rounded kind of generalist, which I did.
Sure.
I felt like the business side was the thing missing. So I actually did an MBA at the same time I did my MArch.
Perfect.
And then I went into the profession with both of those things.
Okay.
Design was my strength, the creative side. So the first half of my career was more heavily involved in project work, almost exclusively project work.
Sure.
And then more recently, as I've kind of risen through the firm and taken on more of a leadership role, I've elevated into responsibilities around the operation and business side.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I mean, that actually seems natural. I would imagine most people, or many people, coming up have a better handle on the design, innovation side, and then supplement and try to learn that business side. So tell me about your MBA a little bit. What was that experience like for you? Was it eye-opening, or did you feel like it was just common sense, or did it tell you what the rules were so you knew which ones you could break? What's your take on an MBA? Because there are a lot of people now thinking about grad school or what's next. So isn't an MBA what's next for these folks?
Could be. Again, going back to the reasons I did it, is this idea that I knew someday I wanted to either run a firm or own a firm. And I wanted to know what I was doing.
Yep.
The reality is the MBA, just like architecture school, you don't graduate architecture school knowing everything you need to know about architecture. You know how to think. You know how to problem solve, you know how to design, and then you use those skills and then learn what you need to know as you do your work. MBA is similar, but instead of design thinking, The MBA really centers around resource management. So whether that's contract negotiation, staffing, people, managing widgets in a factory.
Yeah.
So you learn tools, techniques, tips, tricks, enough things to know how, to know the concepts behind resource management. But you don't actually know anything, in great detail. You just know enough to know where to learn, which is like architecture school. You know enough to know where to learn.
Yeah.
And so then you can leverage those things as you develop those skill sets through the course of your career.
Yeah, I love how you said that, because I found as well, once I got into management, I was starting to find or be presented with challenges that didn't meet anything I had seen in a textbook. Day to day, and the things that come up upon us are all very unique and require creative solutions in some ways. So now I'm curious. We talked a little bit about your day to day, the common stuff. Can you give me some interesting stories or some unique experiences of things that really caught you off guard? Maybe something in the last year with either a client or maybe on staff that you didn't expect, or really threw you for a loop, or you really had to maybe pause for a second and think, okay, how can I creatively solve this problem that I've never seen before?
I don't know if a specific example comes to mind, but I would say I'm constantly caught off guard, almost daily.
That's good to say, and good for folks to hear.
By the people.
Mm-hmm.
So the people in whether it's running a firm or doing a project, I find the people that we work with, the people that we employ, to be both the most rewarding, but also the most surprising in many cases. And so you're constantly dealing with challenges. People that are maybe we're not leveraging well, and we want to leverage more into their strengths. So we figure out how to do that. So that's rewarding when you get that to click.
Yeah.
People that are misaligned and then thus underperforming and dealing with issues there, or project team challenges. It just, the people factor is the wild card in everything. Clients are somewhat predictable. The project process is somewhat predictable, but life happens. People get married, they have kids, they have personal things that they need to deal with, and then there's also things they celebrate. Good things that happen. But all of that is a constant mix of things that keep your day, if you're in leadership, that keep your day completely unpredictable.
Yep. Plus one to that. I see that all the time myself, and I often feel like many times I need a psychology degree, not an architecture degree, to do this job correctly.
Right.
Let's move over to the client side a little bit, because I think there's some unique psychological aspects to that as well, in terms of how to sell. So selling isn't something that we learn necessarily in architecture school, other than crits and in presenting our work. What have you learned about selling and design on the client side? What works, what doesn't work, tips, tricks, anything that you've really learned or noticed about how to sell architecture to somebody who's not an architect?
Yeah, I'd say it starts with not selling. I try not to sell. I try not to come across as though I've got to sell you on why you should buy that glass of water. Really, I want to know, when I'm getting with any client, I want to learn a lot about them as much as I can, where they went to school, what their interests are. Have they written in industry somewhere? What have they written about? Have they just revamped their mission and vision statement? What's behind that? What motivates them? What makes them tick? And at the end of the day, if I can figure out what keeps them awake at night, and then have a conversation with them about those things, engage them in a dialogue to talk through what are the things you're struggling with. Here's what we're seeing. How can we help you solve those things? And if we can do that, then almost all the time we're successful in winning work with those clients, the ones that we engage on that level, because we're no longer selling a commodity. Like, we're not just trying to produce buildings for the sake of producing buildings. What we're really focused on is having an impact with our clients for whatever they're trying to do. So if it's a hospital, we're trying to impact a community. We're trying to impact certainly the patients, the staff, the family, the visitors, the client. We're trying to have an impact. So we don't want to sell as though it's a commodity. We really want to invest in our clients in thought leadership and design thinking in the creative process, and maybe even try to help them get to a place that they yet aren't imagining that they can get to. And if you become that trusted advisor, then the getting work part happens naturally.
Yeah, I once heard that in any relationship that you should always try to give at least 51% and get no more than 49%, so that you're always on the side of the equation where you're giving more than you're getting, and that seems to work. You talked about approachability and authenticity and being genuine as ways to sell. There's an element that you mentioned when you started that I think is really interesting, and you talked about researching the client and knowing who it is that you're about to speak to and if they've written anything or what they've done. And so it sounds to me that researching and preparation when developing a relationship is part of that equation, knowing what you're walking into before you get there. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, it's in architecture school, before you start designing, you'll investigate a site. You'll research what's going on around it, precedent, case studies, other project types that might relate. You do the same thing, it's the same process at a client level. Who they are, who are their competitors, what's going on around them, around their space. Just trying to draw forward as much information as you can to then synthesize that. And instead of the problem in this case being a piece of architecture, the problem in this case is how do I relate to this person? What do they care about? Because if I just go in and talk about what I care about,
Yep.
I want to win design awards, or I
100%.
want to do this, or I want to do that, then I'm not listening to them, I'm not hearing them, and I may just completely miss the boat.
Yep. Some really good nuggets of wisdom there. Shannon, this is spot on so far. Let's go to the third element that you mentioned, innovation. So we talked a little bit about operations. We talked a little bit about the client side. So let's talk about innovating in business development and moving your firm forward. When you're thinking about what's next, I mean, you've been at HKS for a while now, right?
Yeah.
So how do you keep that fresh? How do you make sure that you're always looking toward, the current year, the next 5 years, the new thing? How do you keep it fresh?
I probably have some form of ADHD. I've never been diagnosed. If I grew up today, I'd
Sure.
probably certainly be diagnosed. So I constantly have to think about what's next, because if I just have the same job every day, I get bored. It's just the way I work. But I like to think both within our firm, within process. There are people that are really good at that. That's not my thing per se.
Okay.
But so I'm not innovating necessarily change our process, but I innovate around where we should be as a profession. So for example, some of the things I'm thinking about right now that I'm writing or speaking or presenting on deal with the importance of design on the health of our communities. So not healthcare, but just, is it safe? Can you walk? What's the quality of the neighborhood? And so a lot of our focus in our strategic planning and our business case is to reinforce this idea that architecture is a vehicle for shaping communities, and communities are what determines our health as a society, as a people. It's not healthcare, it's communities and the quality of those communities and neighborhoods. So when you zoom out on that gets into resiliency and sustainability and all these kinds of threads you can pull to be a thought leader, within the firm, but also within the industry or within the profession.
I mean, I think what you just enunciated there is really the definition of architecture. I think sometimes we get caught up so much in, do we like the aesthetic of the building, or is it pushing boundaries with materials or something else? But at the end of the day, we're affecting people's lives and we're affecting communities. And if you think of architecture strategically, before you even put pen to paper about those elements, well, I think that's really a higher level architecture.
Yeah, and I think that is the point, is for hundreds of years, if not thousands, the buildings within which we live impact our lives. Whether we think about them that way or not, they do. And so there's really an opportunity for us to step forward to regain leadership in society, not just in winning design awards, and those are good, I like awards, but win them for this more holistic approach to what it does to elevate the human condition. And so a lot of what we think about when we're talking with clients is thinking about beyond the property lines. Yes, this is the project you want to do. By us doing this project, what kind of impact can we have on the neighborhoods around that project, and then on the city or the community beyond that? And what other partners should we bring to the table? Because maybe we should have a green space, or maybe we should have a park, or maybe we should have something else, some other amenities that both help you, add value, but spur growth and development in a positive way for the surrounding community.
Yeah.
So thinking beyond the property lines for how you can positively influence the profession.
I think that's a really impactful, insightful thing that you just said here. So if you're watching this now and you didn't quite get all that, literally scoot back 2 minutes, rewatch this section, because I think that's spot on in so many ways. Shannon, let's wrap up here. Let's take me outside of your day-to-day in architecture a little bit. How do you stay educated? What do you do outside of the office that keeps you excited about the world? Are you reading? Do you listen to podcasts? Do you volunteer? What are you doing outside of the office that keeps you engaged in the world?
That's yes, I read mostly non-architecture related things.
I think that's fantastic.
Yeah,
Give us a rec.
I like a lot of historical fictions. There's
Cool.
a book recently on World War II about an Italian guy that ended up working for the Nazis, but he was a resistance person, so he ended up being a spy, undermining the German efforts in World War II. It's a pretty good book. I think it's called Under the Crimson Sun, or Under Crimson Sky.
Under Crimson
Good
Sky.
book. So a lot of historical fictions. I like to be grounded. I like diversions. Do a little hockey, do a little running. Anything
Yeah.
to kind of get out and be active.
Good stuff.
But I would say what motivates me more than anything
Yeah.
is seeing people succeed, particularly people that we work with and we employ. I mean, there was a time early as a leader, I'd say this is the biggest thing about leadership management, is early in your career, you're tempted to think about what you're doing. What am I doing? How am I succeeding? Am I growing the way I need to grow? At some point, a switch flips and you stop thinking at all about yourself and you start thinking about, how is Mike growing? How is Susan growing? What does she need to grow? And when you see that person start to take that next step, even without you nudging, but because they're getting that confidence, they're making it, that's where things become magical.
I think that's brought it full circle here. I mean, we're ending with the people, and we kind of started with the people. And that's what it's all about. It's about the people in so many ways. And even when we talked about architecture, it's about making the world a better place for people to live in. So, Shannon, I want to thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
This has
Enjoyed
been fantastic. And again, I hope you guys watch this once, twice, 10 times, because there's tons of knowledge that was just dropped. So, thanks, Shannon, and we'll see you next time on the Ask an Architect show.